My name is Harper and am 25 years old. Right now, I'm standing in my grandfather's study, staring at bank statements spread across his mahogany desk, and the numbers refuse to make sense. $3 million. In my name. For my entire life. My parents stand frozen in the doorway, their faces drained of every drop of color, as my grandfather's weathered hand pushes another document toward me. The truth sits there in black and white, impossible to deny. How long had they been lying to me? This birthday gift wasn't cake or candles. It was betrayal wrapped in legal documents, tied with a ribbon of deceit that had been choking me for 25 years. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're ready to hear how my entire world shattered in one evening, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, because this journey is going to take us through family secrets, manipulation, and a fight for justice that nearly destroyed me. Now, let's go back to where it all began. Growing up in our modest suburban home in Ohio, I never questioned why money was always tight. My mother Diane, a former elementary school teacher who'd left her job when I was born, managed our household with what she called practical frugality. My father Gerald worked as an insurance agent, bringing home what they described as a decent but limited income. The phrase "we can't afford that" became the soundtrack of my childhood, playing on repeat whenever I expressed any want or dream that reached beyond our carefully maintained boundaries. I learned early to swallow my disappointments, to transform my desires into something smaller, more acceptable, less expensive. When I was 8 years old, I watched my best friend Sarah twirl across the community center stage in her pink ballet costume, her parents beaming from the front row. I'd begged for dance lessons for months, practicing improvised pirouettes in our living room, my imagination painting me into that same spotlight. My mother sat me down at our kitchen table, her expression a practiced mask of regret, and explained that dance lessons simply weren't in our budget. The classes cost $70 a month, she said, and we had to be responsible. I nodded, fighting back tears, and never asked again. That became my pattern. I learned to kill my dreams before they could fully form, saving my parents the trouble of crushing them. School brought its own humiliations. While my classmates wore the latest styles, I navigated the social hierarchy in clothes from the local thrift store. My mother justified this as teaching me not to be materialistic, to value substance over appearance, but the girls who mocked my outdated jeans and worn sneakers didn't care about those life lessons. I developed thick skin out of necessity, telling myself that character mattered more than clothing, even as I felt myself shrinking in group photos, trying to hide my second-hand existence. My parents praised my maturity, my lack of vanity, never acknowledging the shame that burned in my chest every single day. High school brought new dreams and new denials. I excelled academically, my grades opening doors to universities across the country, possibilities that sparkled like distant stars. My guidance counselor pulled me aside junior year, her eyes bright with excitement, as she showed me scholarship opportunities and programs designed for students exactly like me. I went home bursting with hope, my acceptance to a prestigious university in California feeling within reach. My father listened to my pitch, his face unreadable, then shook his head slowly. Out-of-state tuition was astronomical, he explained. Even with scholarships, we couldn't possibly afford the remaining costs. I would attend the local community college, live at home, and transfer later if finances improved. They never did. Community college meant working 3 part-time jobs to cover my tuition and books. I waitressed mornings at a diner where the coffee always tasted burnt, stocked shelves at a grocery store during afternoon shifts, and cleaned office buildings at night when the city went quiet. Sleep became a luxury I rationed carefully. My parents applauded my work ethic, told visitors how proud they were of my independence and responsibility. When I asked them for help with even a small portion of my tuition, my father's face hardened. This was exactly why I needed to learn these lessons, he said. The real world didn't hand out free passes. I needed to understand the value of money, the cost of education, the weight of responsibility. I graduated with my associate degree and $80,000 in student loan debt. The number so large it felt abstract. Impossible. A life sentence in numerical form. The only bright spot in those difficult years was my grandfather Richard Westfield, my mother's father, who visited twice a year like clockwork. He lived 3 hours away in a world that seemed completely separate from ours, running a successful commercial real estate business that my parents rarely discussed. His visits transformed our house, tension crackling through rooms like electricity before a storm. My parents would clean obsessively, my mother snapping at me to put things away, to make everything perfect, though she never explained why. When Grandpa Richard arrived in his elegant sedan, my father's smile looked painted on, tight, and unconvincing. Grandpa Richard was different from my parents in every way that mattered. He looked at me with this profound sadness in his eyes, an expression I couldn't interpret as a child but that haunted me nonetheless. He'd ask about school, about my dreams, actually listening to my answers instead of waiting for his turn to speak, and he'd slip me $20 bills when my parents weren't looking, pressing them into my palm with a conspiratorial wink. The first time my mother discovered one of these gifts, her reaction terrified me. She'd stood in my doorway, the bill clutched in her fist, her face twisted with an anger I'd never seen before. She accused my grandfather of undermining their parenting, of trying to buy my affection, of interfering in matters he didn't understand. The money disappeared, and I never learned where it went. After I graduated from community college, I transferred to a state university, taking on even more debt to complete my bachelor's degree in accounting. I'd chosen the major strategically, knowing it offered stable employment, decent salaries, a path toward financial security. My parents couldn't argue with the practicality, though they contributed nothing toward the cost. I graduated at 23, exhausted and broke, my total student debt now hovering near $100,000. The number felt like a physical weight, something I carried on my back every single day. My first job as a junior accountant paid $42,000 annually, which sounded substantial until the loan payments started. After rent on my tiny studio apartment, utilities, food, and the minimum payments on my crushing debt, I had virtually nothing left. I lived on rice and beans, walked instead of driving, patched my clothes instead of buying new ones. My parents visited my apartment once, my mother's nose wrinkling at the cramped space, my father noting that if I'd been more financially responsible, I might have saved enough for something better. The irony of their criticism didn't seem to register with them at all. My 25th birthday approached without fanfare. I planned to spend it alone in my apartment, too tired from 60-hour work weeks to celebrate. Then my grandfather called, his voice carrying an urgency I'd never heard before. He wanted me to come to his estate for a birthday dinner, just the two of us. Something important to discuss, he said, and it couldn't wait any longer. When I mentioned this to my parents during a rare phone call, their reaction was immediate and explosive. My mother's voice went shrill, warning me that Grandpa Richard was manipulative, that he had his own agenda, that I shouldn't go. My father took a different approach, his tone heavy with disappointment, suggesting that spending time with my grandfather instead of them on my birthday showed where my priorities lay. But something in my grandfather's voice had resonated, a note of desperation that I couldn't ignore. I told my parents I'd visit them another day and drove to my grandfather's estate, curiosity overriding every warning they'd issued. The iron gates of my grandfather's estate swung open as my car approached, revealing a tree-lined driveway that seemed to stretch forever. I'd been to his house for brief visits over the years, but always with my parents hovering, always for carefully timed encounters that ended before I could explore or settle in. Now, driving alone through grounds that belonged in a magazine, I realized I'd never truly seen where my grandfather lived. The mansion emerged from behind ancient oaks, 3 stories of elegant stone and tall windows that caught the late afternoon sun, and for the first time, I understood the full scope of the wealth my mother had left behind when she married my father. My grandfather waited at the front door, and the sight of him shocked me into stillness. Had aged dramatically since his last visit 6 months ago, his tall frame seeming diminished, his skin carrying a grayish pallor that spoke of illness. But his eyes remained sharp, focused, burning with a determination that made him stand straighter as I approached. He embraced me carefully, and I felt how fragile had become, how his shoulders had narrowed, how his expensive suit hung loose on what had once been a commanding presence. We didn't make small talk. He led me directly through marble halls hung with oil paintings, past rooms filled with antique furniture, to a study lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound books. The door clicked shut behind us with a finality that made my heart race. He gestured for me to sit in a leather chair facing his massive mahogany desk, then lowered himself carefully into his own seat, moving like someone whose bones hurt. For a long moment, he just looked at me, his expression cycling through emotions I couldn't name. Then he reached into a drawer and pulled out a thick leather folder, the kind lawyers use for important documents. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it, and I saw papers inside, official-looking forms with seals and signatures, bank statements, legal documents that made no sense to my racing mind. The bombshell dropped quietly, just a few simple words that rewrote my entire existence. Your grandmother left you $3 million when she died. The sentence hung in the air between us, incomprehensible, impossible. My grandmother had died when I was born. Complications from the cancer that had ravaged her body during what should have been the joyful anticipation of her first grandchild. I'd grown up with only photographs of her, a beautiful woman with kind eyes who I'd been told I resembled, someone who'd loved me before ever meeting me but who remained essentially a stranger. My grandfather watched my face as understanding failed to arrive, then continued speaking, his voice rough with emotion barely contained. The trust fund had been established before my grandmother died, he explained. She'd known her time was limited, and she'd wanted to ensure that her only grandchild would have security, opportunity, freedom from financial fear. The trust was ironclad, designed by the best estate lawyers money could buy, with clear instructions. The money was mine, to be revealed when I turned 18, to give me choices as I entered adulthood. My parents had been named as trustees until that age, responsible for managing the fund and then transferring control to me when I reached majority. Except I'd never been told. Not at 18, not at 21, not at 25. Until this moment. My grandfather slid the bank statements across the desk, and I stared at numbers that refused to make sense. $3 million had grown to $3.2 million through careful investments over the years. 25 years of compound interest, of strategic fund management, of money accumulating while I'd worked myself to exhaustion, drowning in debt that should never have existed. My hands shook as I touched the papers, half expecting them to dissolve like something from a dream. Why? I finally managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. Why wouldn't they tell me? My grandfather's face hardened, anger flashing in his eyes before grief overtook it. He pulled out more documents, a paper trail of deception that had been compiling for years. My parents had claimed they'd handle everything, he said. They'd insisted I wasn't mature enough at 18 to manage such wealth. They'd convinced him, initially, that waiting a few more years would be wise, that I needed to establish myself first, to learn financial responsibility. Head disagreed but had no legal standing to override the trustee's decisions. Then he showed me the trustee fee agreements. $50,000 annually, paid to my parents for their service managing the trust. For 7 years after my 18th birthday, they'd collected these fees, money supposedly earned through the careful stewardship of my inheritance. Except I'd never seen a penny. I'd worked minimum wage jobs, accumulated crushing debt, lived in poverty while my parents collected what amounted to a second income in my name. But the cruelest revelation came next. My grandfather opened a wooden box I hadn't noticed, and from it, he withdrew a stack of envelopes, each one addressed to me in elegant handwriting I didn't recognize. My grandmother had written letters, he explained, his voice breaking. One for every birthday. Meant to be given to me as I grew up, letters sharing her love, her wisdom, her hopes for my future. My parents had kept every single one. They'd never delivered a single birthday message from the grandmother who'd tried so desperately to reach across death itself to love me. My hands trembled as I opened the first one, meant for my first birthday. My darling Harper, it began, and tears blurred the words that followed. She'd written about dreams for my future, about wanting me to have every opportunity, about the joy she felt knowing I existed even though she'd never hold me. Letter after letter, year after year, a one-sided conversation with a granddaughter she'd never stopped loving, and my parents had hidden every word. My grandfather's voice grew rougher as he explained the rest. 7 years ago, when Id turned 18 and the money should have been revealed, Head started asking questions. My parents had been evasive, offering excuse after excuse. Head consulted lawyers, only to discover that as trustees, they had significant discretionary power. The legal battles had begun then. Quiet at first. Attempts at negotiation and mediation. But my parents had fought viciously, filing objection after objection, claiming I wasn't ready, wasn't mature enough, needed more time. They'd extended and delayed, creating bureaucratic tangles that took years to unravel. Finally, after spending hundreds of thousands on legal fees, after years of court battles and appeals, Head won a court order. On my 25th birthday, the trust had to be disclosed. Not recommended, not suggested, but legally mandated. This dinner wasn't just a birthday celebration. It was the deadline my parents could no longer circumvent. The moment when their lies had to end because a judge had demanded it. I sat in that leather chair, surrounded by proof of a betrayal so profound it felt physical. Like something had reached inside my chest and torn out everything I'd believed about my life. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every humiliation, every moment it felt less than, worthless, inadequate, all of it had been constructed on a foundation of lies. My parents had watched me suffer, had created that suffering through their deception, and they'd done it deliberately, systematically. For 25 years, I drove to my parents' house in a daze, the leather folder of documents sitting on my passenger seat like something radioactive. The familiar streets of my childhood neighborhood passed in a blur, every landmark now recontextualized by what I knew. The park where I'd played alone because organized activities cost money, the library where I'd spent countless hours because it was free entertainment, the high school where I'd felt perpetually less than my peers. All of it unnecessary, all of it a lie. Their house looked exactly as it always had. A modest 2-story colonial with aging siding and a yard my father maintained meticulously. It always accepted their claims of financial limitation at face value, never questioning why people struggling with money would choose this neighborhood, this house, this life. Now I wondered what else had been hidden, what other truths had been buried under the carefully maintained facade of middle-class struggle. I didn't knock. I walked through the front door using the key I'd never returned after moving out, interrupting their dinner. They sat at the kitchen table, plates of pasta before them. The television droning in the adjacent living room. The normalcy of the scene, the mundane domesticity, felt obscene given what I now knew. My mother looked up first, her face registering surprise and then immediate wariness when she saw what I carried. The bank statements hit their table with a slap that sent my father's water glass trembling. Papers scattered across their pasta. Documents that couldn't be explained away or denied. For one perfect moment, I watched the blood drain from both their faces, watched them realize that their 25-year secret had finally detonated. Then my mother's expression shifted, fear transforming into defensive anger with a speed that would have been impressive if it wasn't so predictable. "Your grandfather poisoned you against us," she said, her voice rising. "Whatever he told you is manipulation, Harper. Has been trying to turn you against your family for years." My father said nothing, his eyes fixed on the bank statements, his jaw working as if he was chewing words too dangerous to speak. I asked for the truth, my voice surprisingly steady despite the rage building in my chest. Just the truth. Did you know about the trust fund? Were you lying to me this entire time? The admission came wrapped in justification, my father finally speaking in that measured tone he used when explaining why my dreams were impractical. Yes, we knew about the money, he said. We've always known. But we were protecting you, Harper. Do you understand what that kind of wealth does to young people? It ruins them, makes them lazy, entitled, destroys their character. We raised you to be responsible, to understand the value of hard work, to earn what you have. That money would have spoiled you. I laughed then, a sound without humor that made them both flinch. Protected me, I repeated. You protected me by watching me work 3 jobs while attending school? By letting me accumulate $100,000 in debt? By collecting $50,000 a year in trustee fees while I lived on rice and beans? That was protection? My mother's face flushed red, her defensive anger solidifying into something harder. We deserved those fees, she snapped. Do you have any idea how difficult it was to raise you properly, to instill the right values? That was our compensation for doing the hard work of parenting you the right way. The conversation spiraled into accusations and counter-accusations, my parents' justifications growing more desperate and transparent with each exchange. They insisted they'd done what was best for me, that they'd planned to tell me eventually, that I was being ungrateful and selfish. But their arguments crumbled when I asked specific questions, when I pushed past platitudes to actual decisions they'd made. Why had they told my college that I wasn't eligible for financial aid when I was? My father shifted uncomfortably. That was a misunderstanding, he muttered, but his eyes wouldn't meet mine. What about the scholarship opportunities my guidance counselor mentioned, the ones that required parent signatures? My mother waved her hand dismissively. Those scholarships had requirements we didn't agree with, she said. We weren't going to sign away our parental authority just so you could get some free money. You needed to learn independence. Every answer revealed new layers of deception, new ways they'd systematically blocked paths that might have eased my struggle. Then my father made his fatal mistake. He mentioned the lake house. It slipped out during an argument about whether they'd truly struggled financially, a defensive comment about how they'd worked hard too, how they deserved some enjoyment in life, how the place up at Lake Erie had been a good investment. I froze. What lake house? I asked quietly. What investment? My parents' eyes met across the table, panic flashing between them. My mother tried to backtrack, to claim had misspoken. But my father kept talking, his defensiveness overriding caution. They'd purchased a small vacation property 5 years ago, he admitted. Used some of the trustee fees as a down payment. It was an investment, he insisted, property that would appreciate, benefit the family eventually. They'd renovated it last year, added a deck, updated the kitchen. While I'd been cleaning office toilets at midnight to pay my tuition, they'd been renovating a vacation home. The enormity of the betrayal, the sheer audacity of it, left me momentarily speechless. Then the rage came, pure and clarifying, burning away any remaining doubt about what my parents truly were. I told them I knew everything. About the legal battles my grandfather had fought. About the fees they'd collected. About the letters from my grandmother they'd stolen. About every lie, every manipulation, every deliberate choice they'd made to keep me struggling while they prospered. My father's face hardened into something ugly. If you take that money, he said, his voice low and threatening, you'll destroy this family, everything we built, everything we are. You'll tear it apart, over greed. My mother started crying, her tears immediate and dramatic. After everything we sacrificed for you, she sobbed. We gave up so much to raise you right, and this is how you repay us? By believing lies? By turning on your own parents? A sound from the hallway made us all turn. My younger brother Tyler stood there, still in his work uniform from his shift at the electronics store where he worked part-time during his senior year of college. 22 years old, studying engineering at the state university, living at home to save money. His face had gone pale, his eyes wide with shock. How long had he been listening? Long enough, I realized, based on his expression. Long enough to hear everything. Tyler's voice came out rough, confused. You've had Harper's money this whole time? While she was working herself to death? While we told her we couldn't help with school? Mom, Dad, what the hell? My parents turned on him immediately, my mother's tears drying with remarkable speed. This doesn't concern you, Tyler. Stay out of it. But Tyler looked at me, then at the documents on the table, then back at our parents, and something in his face changed. Something that looked like understanding. And beneath it, anger beginning to build. I left before the conversation could deteriorate further. My parents' voices following me through the door, threats and pleas mixing together. My father warning me about the consequences of my choices. My mother sobbing about betrayal and ingratitude. Tyler followed me outside, catching up as I reached my car. We need to talk, he said quietly. Soon. There's stuff you don't know yet. Stuff you need to know. His expression was grim, worried in a way that sent fresh dread through me. What else could there possibly be? Morning arrived with 17 missed calls from my mother. I stared at my phone screen through gritty eyes, having slept maybe 2 hours. The trust fund documents spread across my tiny apartment, like evidence at a crime scene. The text messages had started around midnight and continued through dawn, my mother's tone cycling from guilt-tripping to threats with impressive versatility. Each message, a masterpiece of manipulation, alternatively positioning me as an ungrateful daughter, destroying her poor parents, and as a naive fool being controlled by my grandfather's malicious agenda. I had an appointment that morning with the lawyer my grandfather had recommended, Samuel Brooks, whose office occupied the 20th floor of a downtown building I'd passed countless times without imagining I'd ever enter. The waiting room radiated expensive taste, all leather and dark wood. The kind of place where people discussed millions casually. Samuel himself was in his mid-50s, with silver hair and the calm demeanor of someone who'd seen every variation of family drama, and remained unshocked by human capacity for awfulness. The good news came first. The money was legally mine, unequivocally, and without restriction. My grandfather's court victory had been absolute, eliminating any remaining parental claim or control. I could access the account immediately, transfer funds, make withdrawals, whatever I chose. The trust was dissolved, its purpose fulfilled the moment I'd been informed of its existence. $3.2 million, mine to use as I saw fit. Samuel smiled as he delivered this information, probably expecting relief or joy. Instead, I felt numb, still processing the betrayal that had made this conversation necessary. Then came the disturbing details. Samuel's expression sobered as he pulled out another folder, this one documenting my parents' 7-year campaign to keep me in the dark. 6 separate legal objections filed, he explained, each one more desperate than the last. They'd hired their own lawyers, spent tens of thousands fighting my grandfather's attempts to disclose the trust, and the tactics they'd employed made my skin crawl. Falsified psychological reports claiming I was mentally unstable, emotionally immature, incapable of handling financial responsibility. They'd paid expert witnesses who'd never met me to testify about my supposed deficiencies based solely on my parents' descriptions. Worse, they'd forged my signature on documents. Samuel showed me forms claiming I'd requested to delay access to the trust, statements supposedly written by me expressing that I wasn't ready for the responsibility and wanted my parents to maintain control. The signatures looked close enough to mine to pass casual inspection, but I'd never seen these documents before, never signed anything of the kind. My parents had literally committed fraud, repeatedly, to maintain their lie. The rage I'd felt the previous night crystallized into something colder, more calculating. These weren't mistakes or misguided parenting decisions. This was systematic, deliberate, illegal. Samuel warned me gently that my parents might not be finished. Even with the court order, even with the trust now in my control, they might attempt further legal action. Had seen similar cases where parents contested the resolution, claimed elder abuse or manipulation, tried any avenue to regain access to money they'd come to see as rightfully theirs. I should be prepared, he said, for things to get uglier before they got better. I left his office and immediately called the bank, going through the verification process to access the account for the first time. The representative on the phone confirmed the balance, explained how to set up transfers, how to access online banking, treating this as routine business. For her, it was just another account. For me, it was evidence of 25 years of theft. Not legal theft, perhaps, but moral theft. The theft of opportunity, of security, of the life my grandmother had tried to give me. The transaction history made me physically ill. Year after year of trustee fees, $50,000 extracted annually like clockwork. And other withdrawals too, smaller amounts for what were labeled as trust-related expenses but which seemed suspiciously arbitrary. $5,000 for financial advising fees, $3,000 for legal consultations, $2,000 for account maintenance. All going to my parents or their associates, money they'd siphoned from my inheritance, while I'd struggled to afford groceries. My phone started ringing with calls from extended family, and I realized my parents had begun their counter-offensive. My Aunt Patricia, my father's older sister, called first. Her voice dripped with disappointment as she explained that my father had told her everything. How could I be so cruel, she wanted to know. My parents had devoted their lives to raising me properly, and now I was attacking them over money? Didn't I understand how devastating this was for them? Didn't I care about family loyalty? My cousin Melissa texted asking if it was true that I was suing my parents for money they'd managed responsibly for years. She couldn't believe I'd be so greedy, so ungrateful. My Uncle Frank left a voicemail about how family should always come first, how money destroyed relationships, how I needed to reconsider before I did permanent damage. The calls kept coming, each one a variation on the same theme. My parents had gotten to everyone first, had spun their version of events, had positioned themselves as the victims of my greed and my grandfather's manipulation. Social media made it worse. My mother's Facebook posts were masterpieces of passive-aggressive martyrdom. She didn't name me directly, but the implications were clear. Posts about ungrateful children who forget everything their parents sacrificed. Quotes about family loyalty and betrayal. Shares of articles about elder abuse and adult children who exploit aging parents. Her friends commented with sympathy and outrage, building a public narrative of my villainy without my name ever appearing. My best friend Jenna from high school called, her voice uncertain. "Harper, what's going on? People are saying crazy things. Your mom posted something about betrayal, and my mom said your family is having problems. Is it true you're fighting with your parents over money?" I tried to explain, but the words felt inadequate. How could I convey the enormity of what had been done to me in a phone conversation? How could I make her understand that this wasn't about greed, but about a fundamental violation of trust? Late that evening, Tyler called from a number I didn't recognize. He was at a coffee shop across town, using a friend's phone. Our parents had confiscated his cell phone, cut off his service, locked down everything they could control. His voice shook with a combination of anger and fear. "You need to hear what they're planning," he said. "I overheard them on the phone with their lawyer tonight. It's bad, Harper. It's really bad." We agreed to meet the next morning, but his warning echoed through my sleepless night. What more could my parents possibly do? They'd already lied, manipulated, committed fraud, turned my extended family against me, and launched a public smear campaign. What else was left in their arsenal of cruelty? Tyler looked exhausted when I met him at the coffee shop. A chain location far enough from our parents' house that we were unlikely to encounter anyone who knew us. Head barely slept either, his eyes bloodshot, his hands shaking slightly as he wrapped them around his coffee mug. The barista eyed us curiously, probably wondering about the intensity of our whispered conversation, but I was beyond caring about appearances. The information Tyler shared made my blood run cold. Had been in his room the previous night, door closed but not latched, when our parents' voices in the hallway had carried clearly. They'd been on speakerphone with their attorney, a lawyer Tyler described as sounding aggressive and unethical, discussing strategies to challenge the court's decision. The plan they were developing was sophisticated and vicious. First, they intended to file a claim that my grandfather was mentally incompetent, that his recent illness had affected his judgment, that had been manipulated or coerced into revealing the trust against my best interests. But the more disturbing piece was their plan for me. Tyler's voice dropped even lower as he relayed what had heard. Our parents were collecting evidence to prove I was mentally unstable, financially irresponsible, possibly suffering from psychiatric conditions that made me vulnerable to manipulation. They'd discussed my normal college counseling sessions, where I'd briefly seen a therapist during a stressful semester, and how they could frame those as evidence of serious mental health issues. They were reaching out to anyone who might provide statements about concerning behavior, twisting normal life struggles into pathology. Tyler's hands clenched around his mug. They're going to try to have you declared incompetent, Harper. They think if they can convince a court that you're not mentally sound, they can get control of the trust fund reinstated. Their lawyer said it's a long shot, but it's worth attempting because the payoff is so substantial. He paused, struggling with what to say next. And they're using me as leverage. They told their lawyer that if they cut off my college funding, make it clear I'm suffering because of your selfishness, it adds to their narrative that you're destroying the family. The calculation of it stunned me. They'd weaponize Tyler's education, manufacture his suffering, to strengthen their case against me. Tyler confirmed they'd already done it. His tuition for his final year was due in 3 weeks, and our parents had informed him they wouldn't be paying. The money they'd previously allocated for his education, they claimed, had to go toward legal fees to fight my unjust claims. Tyler would have to drop out, just 3 semesters short of his engineering degree, unless he could find another way to pay. I made the decision immediately. I'd pay for Tyler's education. The trust fund, the money my parents had fought so hard to keep from me, would ensure my brother could finish school. Tyler started crying, relief and gratitude overwhelming him, and I realized how much stress he'd been carrying, how terrified he'd been of losing everything he'd worked toward. But there were more revelations. Tyler had also discovered, through some careful snooping, that our parents' financial situation was far more precarious than they'd let on. The lake house wasn't paid off, but deeply mortgaged. They had credit card debt in the tens of thousands, possibly hundreds. The renovations Tyler had heard about hadn't been cash purchases but financed through home equity loans. Our parents were, ironically, deeply in debt themselves, living far beyond their actual means while preaching financial responsibility to me. This explained their desperation. They didn't just want my trust fund out of greed or control. They needed it. Their lifestyle, their image, their material comfort all depended on income sources that were drying up. The trustee fees had been propping up their finances for 7 years, and now that revenue stream had ended, they were facing their own financial ruin and viewed my inheritance as their salvation. I contacted Samuel Brooks immediately after meeting with Tyler, relaying everything I'd learned. He listened with the practiced calm of someone who'd heard worse, then advised me to be prepared for an aggressive legal assault. We'd counter every claim, he assured me, but these battles took time and energy. My parents were desperate, and desperate people were dangerous. He also recommended I document everything, keep records of all communications, be prepared to defend myself not just legally but publicly. That afternoon, an anonymous email arrived. I opened it cautiously, fearing malware or threats, but instead found photographs. My parents, photographed through a restaurant window, sitting with a man I didn't recognize. The email contained no message, just the images, but they'd been sent from an address that suggested a private investigator or someone with investigative skills. The man with my parents looked slimy, the kind of person whose moral compass had long since stopped functioning. I forwarded the images to Samuel, who recognized the man immediately from his reputation. A lawyer known for questionable tactics, for operating in gray legal areas, for representing clients whose cases required moral flexibility. My parents were escalating, gathering forces, preparing for war, and I was standing in the crosshairs, trying to defend a truth that should have been self-evident but that they were determined to bury under lies. My boss called me into her office on a Wednesday afternoon, her expression carefully neutral in a way that sent alarm bells ringing. Janet was usually warm, approachable, someone who'd supported my career development and advocated for my promotion to senior accountant. Now she looked uncomfortable, her desk unnaturally tidy as if she'd prepared for an unpleasant conversation. "We've received some concerning complaints," she began, not meeting my eyes. "Multiple anonymous calls to HR regarding your character and professional conduct. The allegations were vague," she explained, "but disturbing. Claims that I'd been stealing from family members, that I was emotionally unstable, that my judgment was questionable. HR policy required investigation of such complaints, even anonymous ones. Until the matter was resolved, my responsibilities would be temporarily reduced, my access to certain accounts limited. I wasn't being fired," she emphasized, "but my position was under review." I understood immediately what my parents had done. They'd launched a campaign to destroy my professional reputation, to add evidence to their narrative that I was troubled, irresponsible, unfit to manage finances. I tried to explain, but the words felt inadequate against the weight of institutional policy. Janet was sympathetic but bound by company rules. "The investigation would take time," she said gently, "and in the meantime, I should focus on resolving whatever personal issues were affecting my life." Walking to my car after that humiliating meeting, I discovered the next assault. My tiny apartment building's hallway reeked of spray paint, and my door wore a new decoration. The word "thief" in dripping red letters, impossible to miss, impossible to ignore. My neighbor's doors remained unmarked, making the target clear. I stood there staring at the vandalism, rage and helplessness warring in my chest. I had no proof, but I knew. My parents or someone they'd hired had done this. They were coming after every aspect of my life, determined to break me, to force me into submission. Then my grandfather collapsed. The call came from his housekeeper. Her voice panicked and scared. "Head had a stress-induced cardiac episode," she explained. "The doctors said it was serious but not immediately life-threatening. But his weakened condition made any heart problem dangerous. He was asking for me," she said. "He needed to see me." I drove to the hospital through tears, the guilt crushing. My grandfather had spent 7 years fighting for me, and now that fight was literally killing him. The hospital corridor outside his room became a battleground. My parents arrived an hour after me, despite having no legitimate claim to be there. My mother's face was a mask of concern, her performance Oscar-worthy as she tried to push past me into my grandfather's room. Hospital security had already been briefed, barring them from entry, but that didn't stop them from creating a scene. My mother's voice rose to a wail about being denied access to her dying father, though he wasn't dying and didn't want to see her. Other visitors in the corridor stopped to watch the drama unfold. My mother's accusations carried clearly through the space, designed for maximum audience impact. This was her own daughter, she announced to anyone who would listen. The girl she'd raised and sacrificed for, now keeping her from her father's bedside during a medical crisis. I was killing him with my greed, she claimed, my selfishness causing his stress and health decline. Security eventually escorted them out, but the damage was done. Witnesses had seen a tearful mother being removed while an apparently cold daughter stood unmoved. That performance went viral on local social media within hours. Someone had filmed the confrontation, posted it with a caption about entitled millennials destroying family relationships over money. The video had been edited cleverly, removing context, making me look callous and my mother sympathetic. Comments flooded in from strangers judging situations they didn't understand, calling me ungrateful, heartless, worse. The court of public opinion had tried and convicted me based on a 60-second clip. The financial attacks came next. My credit cards were suddenly maxed out with charges I didn't make. Utilities ID never used sent bills in my name. Collections agencies started calling about debts I'd never incurred. It took hours on the phone with various companies to begin unraveling the mess, and the picture that emerged was damning. My parents, it turned out, had maintained me as an authorized user on several old accounts I'd forgotten about. Cards opened when I was younger that I'd never actively used. They'd run up massive charges, tens of thousands of dollars, all appearing under my name and social security number. Identity theft, but committed by my own parents. I filed police reports, but the officers were skeptical. Family financial disputes were civil matters, they explained. Unless I could prove intentional fraud rather than misunderstanding, criminal charges were unlikely. The sympathetic look the officer gave me said everything about how he categorized this situation: a domestic squabble over money rather than systematic financial abuse. Tyler called in tears. Had been expelled from the university. Our parents had claimed financial hardship, requesting emergency withdrawal of his financial aid on grounds that they could no longer support him. The school, operating under standard policies, had revoked his aid package. Tyler had tried to explain, but university administrators dealt with countless similar situations. Parents' financial information determined aid eligibility, and our parents had effectively ensured he couldn't continue his education. Tyler had moved back home, he admitted, because he had nowhere else to go. Our parents were using his presence as leverage, he said. A hostage in their war against me. They'd told him explicitly that if he wanted to finish college, he needed to convince me to give up my claims to the trust fund, to restore their control, to make things right. Tyler was crying, apologizing, hating himself for being weak, for being used. I tried to reassure him that none of this was his fault, but we both knew he was trapped. The final ultimatum arrived through Samuel Brooks' office, delivered by my parents' attorney. The terms were clear and non-negotiable. I would surrender all claims to the trust fund, returning full control to my parents as original trustees. I would repay all trustee fees they'd received over the past 7 years. Money they claimed was owed for their faithful stewardship. I would sign a legal statement declaring that my grandfather was mentally incompetent, suffering from dementia or other cognitive impairment that had led him to make rash decisions against my best interests. And I would agree to a psychiatric evaluation by their chosen expert to determine my fitness to manage finances. If I refused, the letter continued, they would escalate their legal actions and public campaign. They would pursue criminal charges against my grandfather for elder abuse and financial manipulation. They would ensure that my professional reputation was completely destroyed. They would make certain that I was publicly vilified throughout our community and beyond. The letter ended with a deadline, 48 hours to comply, or face the full force of their retribution. Samuel read the ultimatum with increasing anger, his professional composure cracking. This was extortion, he said bluntly. Blatant, documented extortion. But he also warned me that fighting back would get worse before it got better. My parents were cornered, desperate, and they'd already demonstrated they'd use any weapon available. I needed to decide how much I was willing to endure, how far I was willing to go, whether the fight was worth the cost. I thought about my grandmother, dead before I was born, who'd tried to protect me with careful planning and legal safeguards. I thought about my grandfather, in a hospital bed because he'd fought for me when no one else would. I thought about Tyler, trapped in a house with people who'd use him as a weapon. And I thought about every hard year of my life, every sacrifice made, every dream deferred, because of lies. The answer was clear. I wasn't backing down. Not now, not ever. Whatever it took to win this fight, I would do it. My parents had declared war, and I intended to finish it. Samuel Brooks assembled a team that felt like preparing for actual warfare. A forensic accountant, a private investigator, a media consultant to handle the public narrative, and a specialist in family law. Wa'd seen every dirty trick in the book. The conference room in his office became our war room. Walls covered with timelines and evidence, our strategy mapped across whiteboards like a military campaign. The forensic accountant, Miriam Chen, delivered her preliminary findings 3 days into her investigation, and her expression told me she'd found something significant. Your parents have been living well beyond their reported means for over a decade, she explained, spreading financial documents across the conference table. The numbers didn't lie. My father's insurance agent, salary, and my mother's lack of employment couldn't possibly support their lifestyle. Not even accounting for the trustee fees. Miriam had discovered bank accounts I'd never known existed, property holdings hidden under LLC names, investment portfolios that contradicted every claim of financial struggle. The lake house was just the beginning. They owned a small condo in Florida, timeshare interests in 3 vacation properties, and had recently purchased a luxury SUV through a corporate entity that listed my father as primary officer. The trustee fees had funded a lifestyle of comfortable excess while they'd preached poverty to me. But the most damning discovery was the debt. Over $200,000 in credit card balances, multiple home equity loans, personal loans from sources that charged interest rates suggesting desperation. My father had a severe gambling problem, documented through casino loyalty programs and ATM withdrawals at gambling establishments throughout Ohio and neighboring states. Thousands lost weekly, sometimes daily, chasing losses that never materialized into wins. My mother's compulsive shopping was equally destructive. Department store accounts maxed out, online purchase histories showing binges where she'd spent tens of thousands in single sessions. Designer handbags, jewelry, clothes with tags still attached filling closets at properties I'd never seen. The evidence painted a picture of 2 people spiraling out of control, using my trust fund's trustee fees as a life raft while drowning in self-inflicted financial ruin. This explained everything. Not just their desire to maintain control of my inheritance, but their desperate need for it. Without the trustee fees, their house of cards was collapsing. They'd leveraged everything, borrowed against every asset, and now faced bankruptcy. My $3 million represented their only path to solvency, their rescue from consequences of their own terrible choices. The private investigator, a former police detective named Marcus Walsh, delivered his report next. The photographs I'd received anonymously had come from him, he admitted. Had been investigating on my grandfather's behalf for months, building a case before the big reveal. Marcus had documentation of my parents' meetings with their current lawyer, a man named Vincent Russo who'd been disbarred in 2 other states before setting up practice in Ohio under new credentials. More disturbingly, Marcus had evidence of my parents planning the vandalism at my apartment, traced through phone records and witness statements. Had interviewed my former neighbors, people who'd seen unfamiliar vehicles near my building the night of the spray painting. One description matched my father's recently purchased SUV. It wasn't proof that would hold up criminally, Marcus explained, but it was a pattern of harassment documented thoroughly enough for civil proceedings. Then came the email I'd been simultaneously hoping for and dreading. From Tyler, sent from a library computer, longer and more detailed than our brief phone conversations. Had been carefully documenting everything at our parents' house, photographing financial documents left carelessly visible, recording conversations when they thought he couldn't hear. Tyler had gathered evidence of their latest scheme, and the contents made my stomach turn. Our parents planned to have me involuntarily committed for psychiatric evaluation. They'd found a facility that would accept patients based on family petition, a place with questionable ethics, and a willingness to diagnose patients according to who was paying the bills. Once committed, even for a brief evaluation period, they'd use that as evidence of my instability in court. The temporary commitment itself would become proof I couldn't manage my own affairs, let alone a substantial inheritance. Samuel moved immediately to counter this threat, filing for a restraining order and alerting authorities to the potential for unlawful confinement. But he warned me to be careful, to avoid any situation where my parents could isolate me, to maintain witnesses and documentation of my whereabouts. The playbook they were using, he said grimly, was from extreme cases where families tried to seize control of estates through any means necessary. The countersuit Samuel filed was comprehensive and devastating. Fraud, embezzlement through unauthorized use of trustee discretion, identity theft, defamation, harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. The document ran to 47 pages, each charge supported by evidence that was increasingly difficult to deny. We requested full accounting of every trust fund transaction, depositions from my parents and their lawyers, forensic examination of all claims they'd made about my supposed instability. Then I made a decision that Samuel had advised against, but that felt necessary. I went public with my story. A detailed Facebook post, written carefully with Samuel's legal review, laying out the timeline with supporting documentation, copies of my grandmother's letters, bank statements showing the trust fund balance, evidence of my parents' trustee fees, proof of the legal battles my grandfather had fought. I named no one except myself, kept the language factual rather than emotional, but the story was damning in its simple truth. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Friends I'd lost touch with reached out with shock and support. Colleagues from work sent messages of solidarity. People who'd believed my parents' narrative publicly apologized for their judgments. The post was shared hundreds of times, then thousands, the story resonating with anyone who'd experienced family betrayal or financial abuse. The local newspaper contacted me for an interview. The reporter, a woman named Jessica Martinez, who specialized in human interest stories, had followed the viral social media discussion with professional interest. After vetting my claims and reviewing my evidence, she wrote a feature article that ran in the Sunday edition with the headline "Trust Fund Scandal Rocks Quiet Suburb." The piece was balanced but clear, presenting facts that spoke for themselves. Public opinion began shifting decisively. My parents' friends who'd defended them started quietly distancing themselves as evidence mounted. Social media posts that had vilified me were deleted or edited. Some people who'd participated in the harassment campaign reached out with awkward apologies, claiming they hadn't known the full story. The truth was becoming impossible to deny, and my parents were finding themselves increasingly isolated. But wounded animals are most dangerous when cornered, and my parents were cornered completely. The courthouse steps felt symbolic as I climbed them on a clear Tuesday morning, Samuel Brooks beside me and Tyler meeting us at the entrance. My brother looked thin and exhausted, having finally escaped our parents' house the week before with help from friends who'd provided emergency housing. The dark circles under his eyes spoke to sleepless nights and stress that shouldn't burden a 22-year-old. But his presence mattered. He was there to testify, to tell his truth, to stand against the parents who'd weaponized him. The courtroom itself was smaller than television had led me to expect. Wood-paneled and formal. The kind of space where lives changed through measured legal proceedings, rather than dramatic revelations. My parents sat at the defendant's table with their lawyer Vincent Russo, whose expensive suit couldn't quite mask his reputation for ethical flexibility. My mother looked smaller somehow, diminished, her carefully applied makeup unable to hide the stress that had carved new lines into her face. My father sat rigid, his expression locked somewhere between defiance and despair. The hearing had been expedited due to my grandfather's health. The judge willing to accommodate circumstances that involved an elderly man's medical condition and a young woman's financial access. Judge Margaret Thornton was in her 60s, a family court veteran whose reputation suggested she'd seen every permutation of family dysfunction and remained professionally skeptical of everyone's claims. Vincent Russo opened with his client's narrative, painting my parents as concerned guardians who'd protected a troubled daughter from wealth she wasn't prepared to handle. His presentation was smooth, practiced, designed to elicit sympathy. These devoted parents, he explained, had raised Harper with strong values despite their own financial limitations. They'd instilled in her a work ethic, a sense of responsibility, character traits that wealth might have corrupted. Their decision to delay revealing the trust fund, he argued, came from love and wisdom, not malice. He introduced an expert witness, a psychologist named Dr. Gerald Hoffman, who specialized in family dynamics and financial psychology. Dr. Hoffman had never met me, conducted no evaluation, but spoke with authority about the dangers of sudden wealth on young adults. Based on my parents' descriptions and the biographical information they'd provided, he suggested I demonstrated signs of impulsivity, emotional instability, judgment issues that made immediate access to millions potentially dangerous. Samuel objected repeatedly to speculation and hearsay, and Judge Thornton sustained most objections, her expression suggesting she found Dr. Hoffman's testimony less than convincing. But Russo pushed forward, trying to build a narrative where my parents were heroes of responsible stewardship rather than villains of financial abuse. Then Samuel began our presentation, and the tone shifted dramatically. He called Miriam Chen first, the forensic accountant whose findings dismantled every claim of my parents' financial responsibility. With methodical precision, she detailed the misuse of trustee fees, the unauthorized expenses, the pattern of extraction that had enriched my parents while maintaining my poverty. She showed the judge documentation of the lake house, the Florida condo, the luxury purchases, all funded by money that should have been managed for my benefit. Cross-examination couldn't shake her testimony. The numbers were irrefutable, the paper trail clear. My parents had treated the trust fund as their personal supplemental income rather than a responsibility to be stewarded carefully. Miriam's testimony took over an hour, each revelation more damning than the last. Marcus Walsh followed, the private investigator presenting evidence of my parents' harassment campaign, the spray-painted door, the false reports to my employer, the identity theft documented through credit agencies and collections notices. Head even obtained phone records showing calls between my parents and various entities that had suddenly claimed I owed money, suggesting coordination in the attacks against me. My grandfather appeared via video link from his hospital room, still too weak for physical attendance but strong enough to testify. His voice was thin but steady as he described his late wife's intentions, the trust fund's establishment, the crystal-clear instructions that my parents had systematically ignored. He detailed the 7-year legal battle Head fought, the obstacles my parents had erected, the lengths they'd gone to maintain their deception. When Russo tried to suggest his testimony was compromised by age or illness, my grandfather's response was sharp enough to make Judge Thornton smile slightly. His mind remained formidable despite his physical frailty. The judge reviewed my grandmother's letters, reading several aloud, and I watched her expression soften as she absorbed the love that had transcended death. These weren't documents supporting a legal case but evidence of a grandmother's devotion. Her desire to provide security and opportunity for a grandchild she'd never meet. My mother looked away as the judge read, unable or unwilling to face the theft those letters represented. Then came the character witnesses Samuel had assembled. My former employer spoke about my work ethic, the years I'd juggled multiple jobs, my reliability and competence. College professors testified about my academic performance despite financial hardship. My best friend Jenna took the stand, describing with visible emotion the struggles she'd witnessed, the nights I'd worked until exhaustion, the dreams I'd deferred because I believed I couldn't afford them. Tyler's testimony proved most powerful. He described growing up in a house where money was discussed constantly but never honestly. The performance of poverty my parents maintained while privately living comfortably. The pressure they'd applied when Head tried to support me. The threats and manipulation. The way they'd weaponized his education to force compliance. His voice broke as he admitted his fear of them. The realization that the parents Head trusted had been lying about everything. Vincent Russo tried to shake Tyler's testimony, suggesting Head been influenced by me, that his judgment was compromised by sibling loyalty. But Tyler held firm. "I'm here because it's true," he said simply. "Because what they did was wrong, and somebody needs to say it." Then my parents' carefully constructed facade shattered completely. My mother had been growing increasingly agitated throughout the proceedings, her face reddening, her breathing audible across the courtroom. When Samuel presented the final piece of evidence, bank statements showing the full extent of their debt and financial mismanagement, she stood abruptly. Her outburst silenced the courtroom. "That money should be ours," she shouted, her voice shrill and breaking. "We raised her. We devoted our lives to her. She owes us. The trust fund should have been family money, not just hers. We deserve it." Judge Thornton ordered her to sit down, but my mother was beyond controlling. 25 years of putting up with an ungrateful child, she continued. "And this is how we're repaid? With humiliation and poverty?" My father grabbed her arm, trying to silence her. But the damage was catastrophic. My mother had revealed the truth at the core of their actions. The entitlement and greed they'd wrapped in justifications about parenting philosophy and my supposed well-being. She believed I owed them my inheritance, that their role as parents created a debt I should repay with grandmother's money. Security moved to remove her from the courtroom as she continued shouting, but Judge Thornton called for a recess instead, her expression suggesting she'd seen enough. The break lasted 30 minutes, during which my mother was calmed by her lawyer. My father sat with his head in his hands, and I tried to process the surreal experience of watching my mother's public breakdown. When Judge Thornton returned, her ruling was decisive and comprehensive. The trust fund would be released to me immediately, with no restrictions or conditions. All parental objections were denied permanently with prejudice, meaning they could never be refiled. She ordered my parents to repay any unauthorized withdrawals from the trust fund beyond their legally permitted trustee fees, pending a full forensic accounting. She referred the case to the prosecutor's office for investigation of potential identity theft charges, and she issued a restraining order prohibiting my parents from contacting me or attempting any further interference with the trust fund or my life. The ruling took less than 5 minutes to deliver, Judge Thornton's voice carrying the weight of authority and a hint of personal disgust at what she'd witnessed. My parents sat frozen, the reality of their complete defeat settling over them like ash. Vincent Russo began to speak about appeals, but Judge Thornton cut him off sharply. "The evidence was overwhelming," she said. "An appeal would be frivolous and expensive." She suggested his clients accept the ruling and focus on addressing their own considerable problems. As my parents were escorted from the courtroom, several extended family members who'd attended the hearing sat looking stunned. My Aunt Patricia approached me hesitantly, her earlier judgment replaced by something resembling shame. "I didn't know," she said quietly. "Harper, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what they'd done." Other relatives who'd condemned me now avoided eye contact, confronted with truths they'd refused to see. Tyler hugged me outside the courtroom, both of us crying from relief and exhaustion and the surreal experience of winning a battle we'd never asked to fight. Samuel shook my hand formally, then smiled with genuine warmth. "Justice doesn't always win," he said. "Today it did. 3 months have passed since that courtroom victory, and I'm still learning how to live with abundance after a lifetime of artificial scarcity. The trust fund sits in my bank account, $3.2 million that feels simultaneously real and impossible. I've taken steps that my grandmother would have wanted, actions that honor her intentions while building toward a future she tried to give me. The first priority was clearing the financial wreckage my parents had created. All the debt, legitimate and fraudulent, every crushing loan and collection notice, paid off completely. The student loans that had haunted me for years, eliminated with a single transfer. The credit card balances my parents had accumulated in my name, settled, and my credit report cleared. The freedom that came from zero debt felt physical. like a weight I'd carried for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand straight. Tyler's education became my second priority. I established a trust fund in his name, fully funded through graduation and into graduate school if he chooses. He's back at the university finishing his engineering degree, his housing and expenses covered, his focus finally on learning rather than survival. We talk weekly, building a sibling relationship that our parents' toxicity had stunted. He's in therapy too, processing his own trauma from being raised by people who viewed their children as assets to exploit rather than people to love. I donated $100,000 to establish a scholarship fund in my grandmother's name at the university I'd briefly dreamed of attending before being told it was impossible. The scholarship targets first-generation college students from low-income backgrounds, covering not just tuition but living expenses, books, everything needed to focus on education without the crushing burden of financial stress. The first recipients were announced last month, and their thank you letters made me cry. My grandmother would have loved knowing her money was creating opportunities for others. The rest of the inheritance I've entrusted to a financial advisor, a woman recommended by Samuel who specializes in helping sudden wealth recipients avoid the pitfalls that destroy so many lottery winners and inheritance recipients. We've built a diversified portfolio designed for long-term growth and security. The kind of planning my parents should have done as trustees but never considered. The money will last, will grow, will provide security for whatever future I choose to build. My job situation resolved itself after the newspaper article ran and my name was cleared. Janet called me into her office, apologized for the investigation, restored my full responsibilities, and mentioned that the anonymous complaints had been traced to a phone number associated with Vincent Russo's office. The company's legal department was considering action against him for harassment, though I asked them to let it go. I'd won the important battles. The smaller ones could be released. But I didn't stay at that job. With financial security established, I had the freedom to choose rather than endure. I accepted a position at a non-profit organization that provides financial literacy, education, and assistance to low-income families. The pay is less than I earned as an accountant, but the work feels meaningful in ways that corporate accounting never did. I'm using my skills and my experience to help people avoid the traps of debt and financial abuse, sharing hard-won knowledge that might spare others similar pain. I moved to a new city for the job, putting physical distance between myself and the suburban community, where everyone knew my family drama. The apartment I chose is modest by choice rather than necessity, comfortable but not extravagant. A conscious decision to live beneath my means while I figure out what wealth should look like in my life. I'm learning the difference between poverty, sufficiency, and excess, finding my own balance point rather than having it dictated by others' lies. Therapy has become a non-negotiable part of my routine. A psychologist who specializes in family trauma and financial abuse helps me process the layers of damage my parents inflicted. She's helped me understand that their theft wasn't just financial but emotional and psychological. They stole my sense of security, my trust in family, my belief that I deserved good things. Recovery from that kind of theft takes time and work, but I'm committed to the process. My grandfather's health has stabilized now that the stress of legal battles has ended. He's no longer in the hospital but in an excellent assisted living facility where we visit weekly. We've built the relationship that my parents' interference had prevented. Grandfather and granddaughter finally connecting across the gap of years stolen from us. He tells me stories about my grandmother, filling in the portrait of a woman I wish I'd known. She was fierce, he says with pride. She would have loved seeing you fight back, seeing you win. The folder of my grandmother's birthday letters sits on my nightstand, and I read one each month, slowly working through the years of love and wisdom she'd tried to share. Each letter feels like a conversation with someone who understood me before I existed, who saw my potential and wanted to protect it. I'm 30 years old in 2 months, she wrote for my 30th birthday. I hope by now you've learned that your worth isn't measured in money, but that money can buy you freedom from fear. freedom to choose, to explore, to become whoever you're meant to be. Don't let anyone, even family, make you doubt that you're deserving of good things. Those words haunt me in the best way, a reminder that keeps me grounded when imposter syndrome strikes. I catch myself sometimes, waiting for the other shoe to drop, expecting the abundance to disappear. Old poverty mindset habits that are harder to break than actual poverty, but I'm learning, slowly, to believe that security can be real, that I'm allowed to have enough, that I don't have to apologize for the inheritance my grandmother intended me to have. My relationship status has grown carefully. I'm dating someone named Derek, a high school teacher I met through the nonprofit where we both volunteer on weekends. He knows my full story, the trust fund and family drama, and everything. And his response was simply that he's glad I'm free now. There's no judgment, no sudden interest in my money, no complicated calculations about what I'm worth financially versus personally. He likes me for reasons that have nothing to do with wealth, and that simplicity feels revolutionary after a lifetime of my parents' transactional approach to relationships. I have new friends who know me only as I am now, not as the struggling version of myself that my parents created. These relationships feel cleaner somehow, built on genuine connection rather than pity or obligation. We go to museums and concerts, activities I'd convinced myself I didn't enjoy because I couldn't afford them. Turns out I do enjoy them, quite a lot, when they're not tainted by resentment about what they cost. The grief comes in waves, unexpected and complicated. I'm mourning parents who are still alive, grieving for a relationship that never truly existed. They loved an idea of me. A grateful daughter who would remain forever small and grateful and under their control. They couldn't love the actual me, the person who wanted dreams and opportunities and a life bigger than they'd permit. That loss, the death of hope that they might someday see me clearly, that might hurt more than any financial theft. I have no contact with my parents. The restraining order remains in effect, and I've blocked all their numbers and accounts, filtered emails so nothing from them reaches my inbox. Tyler tells me occasionally how they're doing, though I don't ask. They've filed for bankruptcy, he reports. Lost the lake house and the condo, downsized to a small rental. My father got treatment for his gambling addiction, and seems to be maintaining sobriety, though Tyler remains skeptical. My mother sends letters sometimes, ones that Tyler intercepts, filled with justifications and demands, and occasional guilty-sounding apologies that never quite accept responsibility for what they did. I don't respond. I have nothing to say to them. The people who raised me were capable of systematic, calculated cruelty toward their own child. That's not a mistake or a lapse in judgment. That's a fundamental character flaw. A moral emptiness that renders relationship impossible. Tyler understands, though part of him hopes someday for reconciliation. I don't share that hope. Some betrayals are too complete to forgive, too foundational to overcome. I wish them no harm, but I want nothing from them, including their presence in my life. Last weekend, I drove to the cemetery where my grandmother is buried, a trip I'd been putting off for months. The gravesite is beautiful. A shaded spot beneath an old maple tree. The headstone elegant and simple. I brought flowers, chrysanthemums she apparently loved according to my grandfather, and sat on the grass beside her grave for a long time. I told her everything. About the fight and the victory. About the life I am building. About the ways her gift has transformed my existence. I thanked her for her foresight, for trying to protect me, despite death's limitations, for loving me enough to plan decades ahead. I promised to honor her legacy by living fully, by helping others when I can, by breaking the cycle of cruelty and control that my parents embodied. I promised to be the person she hoped I'd become. Worthy not of the money but of the love that motivated her careful planning. A butterfly landed on the headstone while I sat there. A monarch with orange and black wings brilliant in the afternoon sun. My grandfather had mentioned that my grandmother loved butterflies, collected art featuring them, planted gardens specifically to attract them. The symbolism felt almost too perfect, nature providing the closure I hadn't known I needed. The butterfly stayed for several minutes, wings opening and closing slowly, before lifting off into the autumn air. Walking back to my car, I felt something shift inside me, a settling I hadn't expected. I'm going to be okay, I realized. More than okay. I'm going to thrive. To build a life my grandmother would be proud of. To transform trauma into strength. The money she left me wasn't just financial security. It was a foundation, a launching pad, a vote of confidence from someone who believed I deserved better than what my parents were willing to give me. My grandfather was waiting by his car near the cemetery entrance, having insisted on coming despite my protests about the cold weather. Had visited my grandmother's grave earlier, giving me private time for my conversation with her. We stood together in the October sunshine. Grandfather and granddaughter. The survivors of a family war neither of us had wanted but both of us had won. Some birthday gifts change everything, I told him, echoing thoughts that had been crystallizing for months. This one gave me back myself. It gave me the chance to become who I was always supposed to be, before poverty and lies shaped me into something smaller. My grandfather smiled, his eyes suspiciously bright. That's exactly what she wanted, he said quietly. That's exactly why she did it. We drove away from the cemetery together, toward whatever future we'd build from the wreckage of family betrayal. The trust fund sits in my account, a number that still feels surreal but increasingly natural. It's not magic or salvation or the solution to every problem, but it's freedom. Freedom to choose, to explore, to become, to help others, to live without the crushing weight of artificial scarcity. Freedom to define family on my own terms. To understand that blood doesn't obligate loyalty to people who've proven themselves unworthy of trust. Family isn't just blood, I've learned. It's who shows up, who protects, who loves without conditions or calculations. It's Tyler rebuilding his life with my support, our sibling bond strengthening without our parents' toxic influence. It's my grandfather who fought for 7 years when he could have simply let the lies continue. It's the friends who stood by me when social media tried to paint me as a villain. It's the community I'm building in my new city, connections based on authenticity rather than performance. The story of my stolen inheritance could have destroyed me. For a while, it almost did. But ultimately, it revealed truths I needed to see, freed me from relationships that were poisoning my life, and gave me resources to build something better. My parents intended their deception to serve themselves, but instead, it forced me to become stronger, more resilient, more certain of my own worth than I might have been without that crucible. I think about the girl I was at 18, working 3 jobs and believing she had no other choice. I wish I could tell her that help was coming, that her grandmother had planned for her security even from beyond death, that the struggle wasn't necessary. But I also know that girl, that younger version of myself, developed strength and empathy and determination that wealth alone can't create. The trauma shaped me even as it damaged me, and I'm learning to integrate both realities into whoever I'm becoming. So here's my question for anyone watching or reading this story. Have you ever discovered a truth about your family that changed everything you thought you knew? Have you had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? How did you navigate that impossible decision? Drop your thoughts in the comments, because your experiences matter. Your stories deserve to be heard, and maybe we can help each other make sense of the complicated reality of family relationships that aren't what they seemed. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Share it with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in dealing with family financial abuse or manipulation. These stories matter because they break the silence around topics families often hide, and every share helps someone else feel less isolated in their struggle. Thank you for coming on this journey with me, for listening to a story that was painful to live and complicated to tell. I hope wherever you are, whatever you're facing, you find the strength to demand the truth, and the courage to build the life you deserve. Family should lift us up, not tear us down. And when they fail at that most basic responsibility, we have permission to protect ourselves, to walk away, to choose our own path forward. To everyone fighting their own battles against family betrayal, against financial abuse, against people who should love you but instead try to control you, I see you. Your struggle is real, your pain is valid, and you deserve so much better. Keep fighting. Keep believing you're worth fighting for. And remember that sometimes the family we choose matters more than the family we're born into. Until next time, take care of yourselves and each other.